I am Rebecca Mitchell, 34 years old, a dedicated healthcare consultant who spent the last 6 months working internationally. While abroad, I sent over 70% of my income back home to support my husband Ethan through his rare autoimmune condition requiring expensive treatments. After half a year away, I decided to surprise him on his birthday, expecting to find him grateful and recovering with help from my best friend Stephanie. What I discovered instead shattered my entire world and forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. If you have ever gone the extra mile for someone you love, please like and subscribe before I continue with how my sacrifice was repaid with the ultimate betrayal, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. My life before everything fell apart was demanding but purposeful. As a healthcare consultant specializing in hospital management systems, I had built a respectable career over 12 years. The work was challenging but rewarding, allowing me to help implement efficient care systems while earning a comfortable living. Ethan and I had been married for 7 years, and for the first 5, we had what I believed was a solid partnership. He worked as a graphic designer, and while he didn't make as much as I did, we were comfortable in our modest suburban home outside of Boston. Everything changed 2 years ago when Ethan was diagnosed with what his doctor called a rare autoimmune condition. The diagnosis came after months of fatigue, joint pain, and unexplained weight loss. I still remember sitting in that sterile doctor's office, holding his hand as the physician explained that the treatment would be expensive and ongoing. Insurance would cover some costs, but the specialized medications and treatments would largely be out-of-pocket expenses. "We will figure it out," I had promised him that day, squeezing his hand. "Whatever it takes." And I meant it. When my company offered me a position overseeing the implementation of new healthcare systems in several Asian countries, I jumped at the opportunity. The position came with a significant salary increase and generous living stipends that would allow me to continue paying our mortgage while also covering Ethan's mounting medical bills. It was not an easy decision to leave him while he was ill, but we discussed it extensively and agreed it was our best option financially. The position required me to be abroad for 6 months, with only short breaks between assignments that weren't long enough to justify the long flight home. "I will miss you terribly," Ethan had said the night before my departure, looking pale and tired in our bed. "But knowing you are doing this for us gives me strength." While abroad, I lived as frugally as possible in company-provided accommodations, eating simple meals and declining social invitations from colleagues. Every penny I saved went directly into our joint account to cover Ethan's medical expenses. Each month, I transferred approximately 70% of my income back home, keeping only enough to cover my basic needs. Our weekly video calls became my lifeline. Despite the 12-hour time difference, I would wake up at odd hours just to see his face. Ethan always looked exhausted during these calls, often wrapped in blankets with the lights dimmed, explaining that bright light triggered his migraines. He would detail his latest doctor visits, new medications, and treatment plans with terms I researched after our calls to better understand his condition. "The new infusion treatment is helping," he would say, his voice weak. "But the side effects are brutal." Thank God for Stephanie. Stephanie Brooks had been my best friend since college. When I told her about my overseas position and my concerns about leaving Ethan, she immediately volunteered to check in on him regularly. As a freelance web designer who worked from home, she had a flexible schedule that allowed her to drive Ethan to appointments and help with household tasks. "Don't worry about a thing," she had assured me at the airport. "I will make sure he is taken care of. You just focus on making that money to get him better." During our video calls, Ethan would express his gratitude for both of us. "I don't know what I would do without you two," he would say, eyes glistening. "Stephanie has been bringing meals and helping me keep track of medications. But I miss you so much, Rebecca. Nothing is the same without you here." Those words fueled me through grueling 14-hour workdays and lonely nights in foreign hotel rooms. When I felt homesick or exhausted, I reminded myself of our goal, getting Ethan healthy again so we could resume our life together. As his birthday approached in my final month abroad, I formulated a plan. I had accumulated enough vacation days to take a week off. My current project in Singapore was ahead of schedule, and my supervisor agreed to let me work remotely for a few days afterward if needed. I booked a flight that would get me home the morning of Ethan's birthday, coordinating with his doctor to ensure he wouldn't have any treatments scheduled that day. I didn't tell Stephanie about my surprise visit either, wanting to genuinely shock everyone. In retrospect, perhaps the shock was ultimately mine to bear. The night before my flight, I packed a small suitcase with gifts I had collected during my travels. A handcrafted watch from Switzerland, specialty teas from Japan that were supposed to help with inflammation, and a photo album documenting places I had been, with notes about how I had thought of him in each location. As I boarded the long flight home, I had no idea I was flying straight into the ruins of what I thought was my life. The 22-hour journey from Singapore to Boston left me exhausted, but buzzing with anticipation. After clearing customs and retrieving my luggage, I splurged on a rideshare service rather than taking the longer public transit option. Every minute saved was another minute I would get to spend with Ethan on his birthday. During the 40-minute drive from Logan Airport to our suburban neighborhood, I watched the familiar landscape pass by with a growing sense of homecoming. The fall foliage was at its peak, painting the roadside with brilliant reds and golds that I had missed during my time in Asia's tropical climates. "Almost home?" the driver asked, noticing my eager expression in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I replied, smiling. Surprising my husband for his birthday. "He has no idea I am coming." "Lucky guy," the driver commented as we turned onto my street. The first subtle sign that something was different came when we pulled up to my house. Parked in the driveway was a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize, replacing Ethan's modest sedan. I reasoned that perhaps it belonged to Stephanie, though it looked far more expensive than what she could typically afford on her freelance income. I also noticed that the front yard looked different. The landscaping had been upgraded with new shrubs and a stone pathway I didn't remember. For someone who had been struggling with a debilitating autoimmune condition, Ethan had apparently found the energy for home improvements. Thanking the driver, I wheeled my suitcase up the familiar walkway, heart pounding with excitement. I had my key ready, planning to slip in quietly and surprise Ethan in whatever room he was resting in. The door unlocked with the same familiar click, and I stepped into the entryway, immediately noticing other changes. New artwork hung on the walls, and the hardwood floors that had been there when I left had been replaced with elegant gray tiles. As I quietly set down my bags, I heard sounds coming from the kitchen, the clink of glassware, laughter, and music playing softly. The laughter caught me off guard. Ethan's laugh sounded robust and healthy, nothing like the weak chuckles I heard during our video calls. I moved silently down the hallway, my travel-weary body suddenly alert with curiosity. Peering around the corner into the kitchen, I froze at the scene before me. Ethan stood at the kitchen island, looking nothing like the frail man I had seen on video for months. His face was full and healthy, his posture straight and strong as he chopped vegetables with vigor. He wore a fitted t-shirt that showed none of the weight loss he had complained about. But what truly stopped my heart was the woman standing beside him. Stephanie stood with her back partially to me, reaching into a cabinet for wine glasses. When she turned slightly to say something to Ethan, her profile revealed a pronounced pregnant belly, unmistakably into the second trimester at least. "Do you think we should start telling people the gender?" Stephanie asked, resting a hand on her swollen abdomen. "Now that I am past 20 weeks? "Let us wait until after the baby shower next month," Ethan replied, reaching over to place his hand on top of hers. "Though I can hardly keep it a secret that we are having a little girl." The intimate gesture between them sent ice through my veins. I stood paralyzed, unable to process what I was witnessing. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some explanation that wouldn't destroy everything I believed about my marriage and my best friend. "The nursery paint samples should arrive tomorrow," Stephanie continued, leaning comfortably against my husband. I am thinking the soft lavender would be perfect. Whatever you want, Ethan said tenderly. Our daughter deserves the perfect room. Our daughter. The words echoed in my head like a death knell. There was no ambiguity there, no possibility of misinterpretation. I must have made a sound then, perhaps a gasp or a strangled cry, because they both turned toward the hallway. Her eyes widened in shock as they registered my presence. Rebecca, Ethan exclaimed, his voice cracking with surprise. The knife he had been using clattered to the countertop. You are supposed to be in Singapore. Stephanie's face drained of color, her hand instinctively moving to cover her pregnant belly as if she could somehow hide it from me now. Rebecca, she stammered. We didn't expect you. Clearly, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to my own ears. The room seemed to tilt around me as the implications of what I was seeing fully registered. I can explain, Ethan started, moving toward me with his hands raised placatingly. Explain what? I asked, my voice gaining strength from the anger beginning to rise within me. Explain how my husband and my best friend are having a baby together? Explain why you look perfectly healthy when I have been sending thousands of dollars for medical treatments? Please, by all means, explain. They exchanged a panicked look that confirmed everything. There would be no innocent explanation, no misunderstanding to clear up. The betrayal was exactly what it appeared to be. Rebecca, please sit down, Stephanie said, gesturing to the dining table that I noticed was also new. This isn't how we wanted you to find out. Find out? I repeated incredulously. When exactly were you planning to tell me? After the baby was born? Or were you just going to keep pretending Ethan was sick while I funded your new family from across the world? Ethan approached me cautiously, as if I were a wild animal that might attack or flee. It is complicated, he began weakly. Things just happened. The pathetic inadequacy of those words struck me like a physical blow. 6 years of marriage, reduced to things just happened. My sacrifices, my dedication, my love, all dismissed with a phrase people use to explain forgetting to buy milk at the grocery store. I looked between them, these two people I had trusted most in the world, and felt something break inside me. The pain was coming, I knew, but in that moment, all I felt was a cold, clarifying fury. I think, I said with a calm that surprised even me, that you both have a lot of explaining to do. We moved to the living room where I discovered yet another change. Our comfortable but worn sectional had been replaced with an expensive leather sofa set I didn't recognize. I perched on the edge of an armchair, refusing the seat on the couch Ethan offered beside him. Stephanie sat across from me, her pregnant belly now impossible to ignore under her fitted top. How long has this been going on? I asked, cutting straight to the point. They exchanged another of those looks that spoke of a deep familiarity developed during my absence. It twisted something inside me to see their wordless communication. We didn't plan for this to happen, Stephanie began, her hand protectively cradling her belly. It started innocently. I was just helping Ethan with appointments and errands like I promised you. That doesn't answer my question, I said flatly. How long? Ethan cleared his throat. About a year, he admitted, unable to meet my eyes. A year. While I had been working myself to exhaustion in foreign countries, video calling at 3 a.m. to check on his health, sending care packages and researching treatments, they had been carrying on an affair in the home I was paying for. And the pregnancy? I asked, nodding toward Stephanie's belly. 5 months, she whispered. Simple math told me they had conceived while I was starting my assignment in Japan. I remembered the tear-filled video call where Ethan had told me how much he missed me and how grateful he was for my sacrifices. And your illness? I turned to Ethan, my voice hardening. The rare autoimmune condition that I have been sending thousands of dollars to treat? Was that part of your plan too? His face flushed with guilt. I did have some health issues initially, he defended weakly. The fatigue and joint pain were real in the beginning, but not serious enough to require the specialized treatments you claimed to be receiving, I finished for him. Not serious enough to justify the $60,000 I have sent home over the past 6 months. Rebecca, Please try to understand, Stephanie interjected. Ethan was struggling with depression after his initial diagnosis. I was just trying to help him through it. Feelings developed that we didn't expect. So you decided the appropriate response to unexpected feelings was to sleep with my husband, get pregnant, and continue to let me fund your lifestyle? My voice rose despite my attempts to stay calm. While pretending he was seriously ill? We were going to tell you, Ethan insisted. We just needed to figure out the right way. The right way? I echoed incredulously. There is no right way to tell your wife that you have been lying about being sick while cheating on her with her best friend. I stood up, needing to move, to do something with the energy coursing through me. Show me the medical bills, I demanded. Show me proof of these treatments I have been paying for. Ethan's face paled. Rebecca, that is not necessary. We can talk about this like adults. The bills, Ethan. Now. When he made no move to retrieve them, I stormed to his home office, another room that had been completely renovated with expensive furniture. The filing cabinet where we kept important documents was still in the same place, at least. I yanked open the drawer labeled medical and began rifling through folders. What I found made my stomach turn. There were some legitimate medical bills from early doctor visits, but they were for minor treatments and consultations, nothing like the expensive infusions and specialized medications he had described to me. Most were marked as fully covered by insurance, with minimal out-of-pocket costs. Instead, the bulk of the drawer contained receipts and invoices for home renovations, the kitchen remodel, new flooring throughout the house, landscaping services. There was documentation for the new SUV in the driveway, purchased 4 months ago. Designer furniture, a high-end entertainment system, even a receipt for a luxury weekend getaway to Cape Cod. Ethan and Stephanie hovered in the doorway, watching me uncover their deception piece by piece. You used my money for all of this? I asked, waving the renovation invoices. While I lived in tiny company apartments and skipped meals to save money for your treatments, we can explain, Stephanie started. Explain what? How you faked video calls to make Ethan look sick. I had a sudden realization and turned to him. The dimmed lights, the blankets, the whispered voice. It was all an act, wasn't it? To keep the money coming in. His silence was confirmation enough. How could you do this to me? I asked, my voice breaking for the first time. I worked 14-hour days. I missed my father's funeral because I couldn't afford to fly back for it and still cover what I thought were your medical bills. The memory of that sacrifice hit me anew. My father had passed away 3 months into my assignment, and the ticket home on short notice would have cost thousands. Ethan had assured me that my father would understand, that my priority needed to be earning money for his treatments. I had believed him, carrying the guilt of that decision ever since. It started small, Ethan finally admitted. The diagnosis was real initially, but the condition improved with basic treatment. When you got the overseas offer, I was going to tell you I was better, but then I saw how much money you would be making. So you decided to keep pretending to be sick to access my income. I finished for him. And somewhere along the way, you and my best friend fell into bed together. We fell in love, Stephanie corrected, lifting her chin defiantly. It wasn't just physical. Her words struck me like a slap. As if love somehow made their betrayal more acceptable rather than more devastating. Does everyone know? I asked suddenly, thinking of our friend group. Was I the only one in the dark? Their uncomfortable silence told me everything. Oh my God, I whispered, the humiliation washing over me. Everyone knows. All this time, our friends have known you two were together while I worked abroad to support you. Not everyone, Ethan said quickly. Just a few close friends. We swore them to secrecy until we could figure out how to tell you. I laughed bitterly. How generous of you, protecting my feelings while spending my money. As I continued searching through the files, I found something that stopped me cold. A folder labeled baby containing ultrasound images, a birth plan, and a budget for the nursery. The earliest ultrasound was dated from 4 months ago, proving they had known about the pregnancy far longer than they claimed. But what truly stunned me was a document titled Future Planning. Opening it, I found a detailed financial projection of anticipated expenses for their new family, with a column labeled Rebecca's Contribution, outlining how much they expected me to continue providing monthly. "What is this?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, as I held up the paper. They exchanged another of those looks. "We need to talk about practical matters," Ethan said carefully. "About the future." "The future," I repeated flatly. "Yes," Stephanie interjected. "We know this is a shock, and we handled it badly. But we need to figure out arrangements moving forward." I stared at them in disbelief. "Arrangements?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Rebecca, we were hoping that after the initial shock, we could come to an understanding. Your career is taking off internationally. You are making more money than ever before. While we would build a life here," Stephanie continued, as if this were a reasonable proposal. "We would raise the baby, make a home. You could visit when your work allows. And I would continue to fund this arrangement?" I clarified, wanting to be absolutely certain I understood their audacity. "You are good at making money," Ethan said with a shrug. "We are good at making a family." The casual cruelty of that statement knocked the wind from me. In their minds, I had been reduced to nothing more than an ATM, an absent provider whose only value was financial. "So let me get this straight," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You want me to continue working abroad, sending money home so that my husband and my former best friend can raise their love child together in the house that I pay for?" "When you put it like that, it sounds terrible," Stephanie protested. "How else should I put it?" I snapped. "Please, explain to me the version where this isn't completely depraved." "We thought you might want to be part of the baby's life," Ethan said. "As a co-parent, in whatever capacity works with your career. A co-parent to the child that represents your betrayal?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "While I continue to fund your comfortable lifestyle?" "You were never here anyway," Stephanie said, her tone suddenly accusatory. "Even before the overseas position, you were always working late, always putting your career first." Ethan was lonely. He needed someone who would put him first. The attempt to shift blame onto me ignited a fresh wave of anger. "I was working to support us," I said through gritted teeth. "To build a future together. A future that apparently included funding your affair behind my back." Their manipulation tactics were becoming clearer by the minute. First came the deception, then the revelation, now the attempt to make me feel guilty for their choices. And underneath it all was the assumption, the expectation, that I would ultimately continue to support them financially. As I looked at them sitting together on our couch, Stephanie's hand resting on her pregnant belly, Ethan's arm around her shoulders, I realized they truly believed this would work. They thought that after the initial anger subsided, I would fall in line with their plans. That my dedication to Ethan would somehow extend to funding his new family with my best friend. The depth of their delusion was almost as stunning as their betrayal. The confrontation continued for hours as the full extent of their deception unraveled before me. With each new revelation, the pain cut deeper, transforming from sharp shock to a profound, aching hollowness that seemed to consume me from within. "Did you ever actually love me?" I asked Ethan during a momentary lull in the arguments. The question had been burning inside me, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. He hesitated, which was answer enough. "Of course I did, in the beginning. But people change, Rebecca. We grew apart. We grew apart because I was working overseas to pay for your fabricated medical treatments," I reminded him bitterly. "That was hardly a natural drifting." "It started before that," Stephanie interjected. "You two were having problems for years. You just never noticed because you were always focused on your next promotion, your next project." The revisionist history stung sharply. They were rewriting our entire marriage to justify their affair, painting me as the neglectful workaholic wife too blind to see her marriage crumbling. The injustice of it brought fresh tears to my eyes. "That is not true," I said, my voice breaking. "We discussed my career moves together. You encouraged me to take the promotion 2 years ago, Ethan. You said you were proud of me. What was I supposed to say? He countered. That I was tired of being married to someone who was never home. That I felt like a footnote in your life story. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Had I truly been so blind? Or was this just another manipulation, an attempt to justify the unjustifiable? I thought back to the nights I had worked late, the weekends spent catching up on projects. But I also remembered the vacations we had taken together, the Sunday mornings spent reading in bed, the dinner parties with friends where we had seemed so in sync. Had it all been a performance on his part? If you were so unhappy, why not just tell me? I asked. Why the elaborate deception? Why not just ask for a divorce? Ethan and Stephanie exchanged another of those private looks that excluded me. We needed time to figure things out, he said finally. And we needed financial stability while we did. The cold calculation behind that statement froze something inside me. They had deliberately strung me along, extracting maximum financial benefit while building their new life together. I got up and walked to the large window overlooking the backyard, needing distance from them. Outside, I noticed more changes, a new patio set, landscaping, even what looked like the beginning of a playground structure. They had been using my money to create their perfect family home, all while I worked myself to exhaustion in foreign countries. The profound loneliness of my position hit me then. While I had been calling Ethan from Singapore at odd hours, missing holidays and family events, skipping meals to save money, and living out of a suitcase, he had been here with Stephanie, building a life with my best friend on my dime. The thousands of dollars I had transferred each month hadn't gone toward healing my husband, but toward funding the comfortable nest for his new family. I remembered the care packages I had sent, special foods that were supposed to help with his condition, books to read during long treatment sessions, comfortable clothes for his supposedly diminished frame. I had researched his fake symptoms late into the night, joined online support groups for partners of chronically ill spouses, and called specialists around the world seeking consultations. All while he and Stephanie laughed at my gullibility. I found this in your office, I said, pulling out another document I had discovered. It was a printed email chain between Ethan and a friend, joking about how they needed to keep the golden goose happy, with regular video calls, so I would keep laying eggs. The casual cruelty of their mockery made me physically ill. Ethan at least had the decency to look ashamed. That was just stupid guy talk. I didn't mean it. Did you mean it when you told me you missed me every day? I asked. When you said you were counting the days until I came home for good. When you thanked me for saving your life with the treatments I was funding. He couldn't meet my eyes. The betrayal extended beyond just the two of them. As we continued talking, I learned that many of our mutual friends had known about the affair for months. People I had considered close friends had been complicit in the deception, some even helping to maintain the charade when I called to check on Ethan from abroad. Melissa picked up my prescriptions so the pharmacy would show records of ongoing medication, Ethan admitted, referring to another close friend. And Jason helped me set up the lighting for video calls to make me look sicker. The conspiracy of silence around me was overwhelming. While I had been isolated in foreign countries, everyone in my social circle had been participating in an elaborate deception designed to exploit my absence and my income. And none of them thought this was wrong? I asked, incredulous. Not one person suggested that maybe you shouldn't be cheating on your wife and stealing from her? Some people had concerns, Stephanie admitted reluctantly. But we convinced them it was for the best. That you were happier with your career anyway, and this arrangement would work out for everyone once you adjusted to it. Their confidence that I would eventually accept this arrangement was perhaps the most insulting part of all. They truly believed that after my initial anger, I would fall in line with their plans, continuing to work abroad and fund their family while visiting occasionally like some distant relative. As evening turned to night, the emotional exhaustion began to take its toll. I had been awake for over 30 hours between the international flight and this confrontation, yet sleep was impossible. Every time I looked at Stephanie's pregnant belly, a fresh wave of betrayal washed over me. The ultrasound images haunted me. The earliest one was dated just a week after I had left for my first assignment in Japan. While I had been setting up my temporary apartment and figuring out the public transportation system in Tokyo, they had been celebrating the beginning of their new family. Most devastating was finding a video on Ethan's phone of them at a private gender reveal party with our mutual friends. The timestamp showed it was taken on the same day I had called Ethan in tears because I was missing my father's memorial service to save money for his treatments. In the video, Stephanie cut into a cake to reveal pink filling while everyone cheered. Ethan embraced her lovingly, placing his hand on her still flat stomach before turning to the camera with a beaming smile. To our daughter, he toasted in the video while our friends raised glasses around them. Hours after finding out about my father's death, while I sat alone in a foreign country blaming myself for not being there for my family, they had been celebrating their deception with champagne and cake. But the final straw came when they presented me with a detailed budget for their new arrangement. The document outlined expected monthly contributions from me, with increases scheduled for after the baby's birth to cover childcare costs. We thought it would be fair if you covered the mortgage and major household expenses, Ethan explained, as if discussing a perfectly reasonable business proposal. Plus a stipend for the baby's needs. We can handle daily expenses and smaller bills. That is extremely generous of you, I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. We know this is a lot to process, Stephanie said, her tone patronizingly sympathetic. But think about it logically. You are building an international career. You will be traveling most of the time anyway. This way, you can maintain connections here, have a place to come home to occasionally, and be part of something meaningful. Something meaningful, I repeated slowly. You mean funding the family you created through betraying me? Family is family, however it forms, she said with a shrug. The baby will need financial support regardless of how you feel about us right now. Their expectation that I would financially support their child struck me as the height of entitled delusion. The baby represented the physical embodiment of their betrayal, yet they spoke of it as if it were a connection between us rather than the ultimate division. You are good at making money, we are good at making a family, Ethan repeated, seemingly thinking this phrase was somehow persuasive rather than deeply offensive. In that moment, looking at them sitting together on my couch, in my house, planning how to continue extracting money from me to support their new life together, something broke inside me. But in that breaking came clarity. The fog of confusion and pain began to lift, replaced by a cold, clear certainty about what I needed to do. As Ethan and Stephanie continued outlining their proposed arrangement, detailing how much money they expected me to contribute to their new family, I fell silent. Their voices faded into background noise as a strange calm settled over me. This moment of clarity amid the chaos felt almost transcendent, as if I were floating above the scene, seeing everything with perfect objectivity for the first time. They mistook my silence for consideration, perhaps even acceptance. Stephanie began discussing visitation schedules, suggesting I might want to be there for the birth, despite my work commitments abroad. Ethan pulled out a calendar, proposing holidays I might join them for, as a family. Their presumption was breathtaking. In their minds, my role had already been decided, the absent provider, the checkbook that enabled their comfortable life together, the occasional visitor who would smile politely as they played happy family in the home I paid for. Without a word, I stood up and walked calmly to the home office. I could hear them following behind me, their voices questioning, but I moved with purpose now. From the desk drawer, I retrieved my passport, birth certificate, and other essential personal documents. From the closet, I collected the external hard drive that contained backups of my financial records. Rebecca, what are you doing? Ethan asked, concern creeping into his voice for the first time. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. The balance showed just over $43,000, mostly from my recent deposits. Without hesitation, I initiated a transfer of half that amount to my personal account, one that Ethan had no access to. "Hey," he protested, moving toward me. "What are you doing with our money?" "Half of it is mine," I said simply, my voice steady. "I am taking only my half." While the transfer processed, I picked up my phone and called my bank's 24-hour service line. When the representative answered, I requested an immediate freeze on all joint accounts and credit cards. "This is a potential fraud situation," I explained to the representative while Ethan and Stephanie listened, their faces growing increasingly alarmed. "I need to prevent any new charges or withdrawals until I can come in person to separate my finances." Next, I called my lawyer. Despite the late hour, Marcus answered, having worked with me for years on contract reviews and other professional matters. "Rebecca, everything okay?" "It must be the middle of the night where you are," he answered. "I am actually back in Boston," I replied. "And no, everything is not okay. I need to file for divorce immediately." "How soon can we meet?" Ethan's face paled as I scheduled an appointment for the following morning. "Rebecca, you're overreacting," Stephanie interjected when I hung up. "We should all take some time to process everything before making drastic decisions." "I have processed enough," I replied, continuing to gather important items from around the office. "You have both made your decisions over the past year. Now I am making mine." "You cannot just cut us off financially," Ethan said, panic edging into his voice. "We have bills due next week. The mortgage payment, utilities, the contractor for the nursery." "You have jobs," I reminded them. "And you managed to afford a new SUV, luxury furniture, and complete home renovations while I was gone. I am sure you will figure it out." The calm certainty in my voice seemed to unnerve them more than any anger had. They had prepared for tears, for shouting, for emotional outbursts they could manipulate and redirect. My methodical response to their betrayal didn't fit their script. I moved to our bedroom next, collecting only essentials, enough clothes for a few days, important jewelry including my grandmother's pearls, and personal mementos that couldn't be replaced. I left my wedding ring on the dresser. "Where are you going?" Ethan demanded, following me as I moved efficiently around the room. "This is your home too. You cannot just leave." "This stopped being my home when you invited my best friend into our bed," I replied without looking at him. "And it is no longer a place I want to be." As I packed, Stephanie tried a different approach. "Think about the baby," she pleaded, resting both hands on her pregnant belly for emphasis. "She is innocent in all this. She will be your goddaughter." The audacity of that statement momentarily halted my movements. "My goddaughter?" I repeated incredulously. "You expect me to be the godmother to the child that represents your betrayal?" "We thought it would be a way to keep you connected to us," she explained, as if offering me a generous gift. "A special role in her life." "The only role you want me to have is financial," I corrected her. "And I am declining that role effective immediately." With my essential belongings packed into one suitcase and a tote bag, I headed for the door. Ethan moved to block my path, his expression desperate now that he realized I was truly leaving. "Rebecca, please," he begged. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling, figure out an arrangement that works for everyone." "There is nothing to work out," I told him, meeting his eyes directly. "You and Stephanie have built a life together based on lies and theft. You are welcome to that life, but I will not fund it anymore." "But the bills, the mortgage," he stammered. "Not my problem anymore." "Where will you go?" Stephanie asked, tears streaming down her face now that their plan was collapsing. "That is no longer your concern," I replied. "Just as your life is no longer my concern." As I reached for the door, Ethan made one last desperate attempt. "You cannot just walk away from 7 years of marriage without trying to fix things." I turned to face them both one final time, these two people who had been the center of my world for so many years. In Stephanie's tear-streaked face, I no longer saw my college roommate who had held my hand through breakups and job rejections. In Ethan's panicked expression, I no longer saw the man I had once believed would grow old with me. "I did not break this marriage," I said quietly. You did that systematically, deliberately, over the course of a year. You lied about being ill to exploit me financially. You betrayed me with my best friend. You celebrated your betrayal with our friends while I worked myself to exhaustion to support you. And when caught, your only concern was ensuring I would continue to fund your new family. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and stood straighter. I closed my wallet. I told them firmly, "Find another ATM." With those words, I walked out the door of what had once been my home, ignoring their continued protests behind me. The night air felt cool against my skin as I wheeled my suitcase to the rideshare I had called. The driver helped load my bag into the trunk as I gave him the address of a hotel downtown. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house or the two figures standing in the doorway. Instead, I looked ahead toward an uncertain but authentic future that, for the first time in years, would be entirely my own. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, financial disentanglements, and emotional processing. I extended my hotel stay indefinitely, creating a temporary home base while I figured out my next steps. The hotel room was impersonal but peaceful, free from the painful memories and betrayals that permeated every corner of what had been my home. The morning after I left, I met with my lawyer, Marcus, who listened to my story with professional composure that occasionally gave way to barely concealed outrage. "So let me get this straight," he said after I finished recounting everything. "Your husband faked the severity of a medical condition to access your income while having an affair with your best friend, and then expected you to continue funding their new family after you discovered the truth?" "That about covers it," I confirmed. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "In 15 years of practicing family law, this is one of the most calculated deceptions I have encountered. The good news is, it makes our case very straightforward." He outlined a strategy that focused on financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, explaining that Ethan's deliberate misrepresentation about medical expenses constituted legal fraud within the marriage. The documentation I had gathered from the house provided clear evidence of how my money had been misappropriated. "What about the baby?" I asked, the question that had been troubling me since my departure. "Do I have any financial obligation there?" "None whatsoever," Marcus assured me. "The child was conceived during your marriage, but is provably not yours. In Massachusetts, you have no legal responsibility for a child that is not biologically yours and that you have not legally adopted, regardless of when it was conceived." That confirmation lifted a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged. While I would never wish hardship on an innocent child, the thought of being legally obligated to support the physical embodiment of their betrayal had been haunting me. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, but not without challenges. Ethan initially contested the divorce, claiming I had abandoned the marriage without attempting reconciliation. His lawyer painted me as a career-obsessed wife who had prioritized work over my husband's needs, driving him to seek emotional support elsewhere. But the evidence spoke for itself. The fake medical bills juxtaposed with receipts for luxury purchases. The emails and text messages between Ethan and Stephanie discussing their deception. The financial documents showing my transfers from abroad with notes specifying they were for medical treatment. Most damning was the future planning document outlining how they intended to continue extracting money from me after I discovered their affair. The judge was particularly unimpressed by this evidence of premeditated financial exploitation. While the legal battle progressed, I faced the equally challenging task of emotional recovery. At my lawyer's recommendation, I started seeing Dr. Elena Torres, a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma. "What you are experiencing is not just heartbreak," she explained during our first session. "It is a profound breach of trust from the two people closest to you, compounded by financial exploitation and public humiliation. That creates a unique kind of trauma that requires specific healing approaches." In our weekly sessions, we worked through the layers of betrayal, the personal rejection by my husband, the friendship betrayal by Stephanie, the financial exploitation, and the humiliation of having been the only one unaware of what was happening. I keep wondering if I could have prevented this somehow, I confessed during one particularly difficult session. If I had been more attentive, less focused on my career, would Ethan have remained faithful? That is a common response to betrayal, Dr. Torres explained. Searching for ways we might have been responsible allows us to feel a sense of control. If we caused it, we could have prevented it. But Rebecca, their choices reflect their character, not yours. No career focus justifies elaborate deception and theft. Those words became a mantra for me in moments of self-doubt. Their choices reflect their character, not mine. The professional support was crucial, but I also had to rebuild my personal support system from scratch. Every friendship felt suspect now, knowing many of our mutual friends had been aware of the affair. I couldn't help wondering who had laughed behind my back, who had attended their gender reveal party, while I worked overseas to fund Ethan's fake treatments. Surprisingly, support came from unexpected places. My company was extraordinarily accommodating when I explained the situation, allowing me to take a temporary position in the Boston office while I sorted out my personal life. Colleagues I had only known professionally reached out with offers of help, dinner invitations, and genuine concern for my well-being. Teresa, a project manager I had worked with briefly in Singapore, happened to be relocating to Boston and needed a roommate. 2 months after leaving my home, I moved out of the hotel and into a bright apartment in Cambridge with her. The fresh start in a place with no history or painful memories was exactly what I needed. Ethan and Stephanie did not accept their new financial reality gracefully. Without my income, they quickly fell behind on the mortgage payments and other bills. The expensive lifestyle they had created during my absence proved unsustainable on their combined income, especially with a baby on the way. Their desperation led to increasingly aggressive attempts to access money. Ethan drained what remained in our joint checking account before I could complete the formal separation of finances. Stephanie attempted to use an old emergency credit card I had given her years ago, running up charges for baby furniture and nursery decorations before I discovered and canceled it. They reached out to mutual friends, spreading a narrative that I had cruelly abandoned them in their time of need, leaving a pregnant woman without support. Some people believed them, but others saw through the manipulation, especially as details of their deception came to light during the divorce proceedings. Their most brazen move came 3 months after I left, when Stephanie gave birth to their daughter. Ethan sent me hospital photos with a note suggesting I might want to meet my goddaughter and not so subtly mentioning the unexpected medical expenses they were facing. When I didn't respond, Stephanie followed up with a detailed list of items they needed for the baby, complete with links to where I could purchase them. The entitlement was staggering. Even after everything, they still viewed me as a resource to be tapped, an open wallet rather than a person they had deeply wounded. My lawyer advised me to cease all direct communication with them, routing necessary conversations through legal channels. This boundary proved essential for my healing process, creating space for me to focus on rebuilding my life without their manipulative intrusions. The divorce was finalized 6 months after I discovered their betrayal. The judge's ruling was heavily in my favor, requiring Ethan to repay a significant portion of the money that had been fraudulently obtained and used for non-medical purposes. The house, which was primarily in my name, was ordered to be sold with proceeds split according to original contribution percentages, which heavily favored me. When the house sold, Ethan and Stephanie were forced to downsize significantly, moving into a small apartment that better matched their actual financial situation. According to mutual acquaintances who still kept me updated, the stress of financial struggles and caring for a newborn had begun to strain their relationship, with frequent arguments about money and responsibilities. I took no pleasure in their difficulties, but neither did I feel responsible for them. They had made their choices with full awareness of potential consequences, gambling that I would be too emotionally invested or manipulable to hold them accountable. As the 1-year mark of my discovery approached, I found myself in a surprisingly stable place. The The promotion I had been working toward came through, allowing me to take a leadership role in my company's East Coast division. I had developed new friendships that were built on mutual respect rather than shared history. My financial situation had recovered from the significant blow of the divorce. Most importantly, I had begun to trust again, carefully and with appropriate boundaries. I no longer viewed every relationship through the lens of potential betrayal. As Dr. Torres had helped me understand, what happened was not an inevitable outcome of trusting people, but a reflection of the specific individuals I had trusted. The woman I saw in the mirror now looked different from the one who had stepped off that plane a year ago. She was more cautious, perhaps, but also more discerning. More independent, but also more intentional about the connections she formed. She had learned to value herself not for what she could provide to others, but for who she was in her own right. I had closed my wallet to those who saw me as nothing more than a resource. In doing so, I had opened the door to a life defined by authentic connections and self-respect. 1 year after walking out of my former home with just a suitcase of belongings, I stood in my new apartment in downtown Boston, watching the sunset paint the skyline in hues of gold and pink. The space was entirely mine, decorated with items I had chosen that reflected my personality and tastes rather than compromises or someone else's preferences. My life had transformed in ways I could never have predicted. The promotion I had accepted came with not just increased responsibility and compensation, but also the opportunity to build a team that aligned with my values of transparency and integrity. I now led the East Coast Implementation Division for my healthcare company, working primarily from Boston with occasional travel that I controlled and planned. The divorce had been finalized for 6 months, with all financial entanglements resolved. The house had sold for a good price despite Ethan and Stephanie's attempts to delay the process. My lawyer had been worth every penny, ensuring that the court recognized the fraudulent nature of Ethan's actions and awarded me appropriate compensation for the funds that had been misappropriated. My relationship with money had changed profoundly. Where once I had viewed my income primarily as a resource to support our shared life and Ethan's supposed medical needs, I now saw it as a tool for creating security and opportunities for myself. I still lived well below my means, but the savings now went toward my own goals and future rather than being siphoned away to fund someone else's deception. The most significant changes, however, were internal. Through consistent work with Dr. Torres, I had processed the complex trauma of betrayal and begun to rebuild my sense of self-worth outside of what I could provide for others. The most damaging aspect of what they did, Dr. Torres had explained in one of our later sessions, was not just the infidelity or even the financial exploitation. It was the fundamental message that your value to them was purely utilitarian. That is why healing requires recognizing your inherent worth beyond what you can give to others. Those words had become foundational to my recovery. I learned to ask myself regularly, would I still feel valuable if I could give nothing to anyone? The answer, which had once been uncertain, was now a confident yes. My social circle had been completely reconstructed. Some friendships had been irreparably damaged when I discovered their knowledge of the affair. Others had naturally faded as I established boundaries around people who had been part of the toxic dynamic. But new connections had formed, healthier ones based on mutual support and genuine interest rather than utility or history. Teresa, my unexpected roommate from the early days after the divorce, had become a close friend before moving in with her boyfriend 6 months ago. Through her, I had met a diverse group of people unconnected to my past life, who knew me only as I was now, not as half of a fraudulent marriage. I had even begun dating again, cautiously and on my own terms. Nothing serious yet, but enough to know that my capacity for trust had not been permanently destroyed, just made more discerning. As for Ethan and Stephanie, I knew only what occasionally filtered through to me via mutual acquaintances. They were struggling financially, the reality of raising a child on their actual income far different from the subsidized lifestyle they had envisioned. The relationship that had seemed so passionate during their deception had reportedly cooled under the pressures of parenthood and financial stress. They had made several attempts to re-establish contact with me in the months after the divorce was finalized. First came the birth announcement for their daughter, Emma, with a thinly veiled suggestion that I might want to send a gift. Then came a request from Ethan for a friendly coffee to clear the air. Most recently, Stephanie had reached out saying she missed her best friend and thought perhaps enough time had passed for reconciliation. I never responded to any of these overtures. Not out of lingering anger, though that would have been justified, but because I recognized them for what they were, attempts to regain access to my resources, whether emotional, financial, or both. I had closed that door firmly and had no intention of reopening it. The most valuable lesson I had learned through this painful journey was about the power of boundaries. Before, I had equated generosity with worthiness, believing that my value lay in how much I could give to others. I measured my importance by my usefulness, my goodness by my sacrifices. Now I understood that true generosity could only come from a place of strength and clear boundaries. Giving from depletion or obligation wasn't generosity at all, but a form of self-abandonment that ultimately served no one well. I still gave to others, perhaps more authentically than before. I mentored junior colleagues, volunteered monthly at a women's shelter teaching financial literacy, and supported friends through their own life challenges. But I did so from a foundation of self-respect and with clear limits that protected my well-being. The woman who had stepped off that plane a year ago, excited to surprise her husband on his birthday, seemed like a different person now. She had been devoted but naive, generous but exploitable, loving but with dangerous blind spots. I felt compassion for her rather than embarrassment or regret. She had done the best she could with the understanding she had at the time. If I could speak to those watching this who might recognize themselves in my story, I would tell them this: your value does not lie in what you can give others. Your worth is not measured by your usefulness or sacrifices. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to close your wallet to those who only value you for what they can take. True connections, whether friendships, family relationships, or romantic partnerships, are built on mutual respect and reciprocity. Not necessarily equal giving at all times, but a fundamental recognition of each other's inherent worth beyond utility. I keep a small framed quote on my desk now, words that guided me through the darkest days of recovery and continue to remind me of my hard-won wisdom. Love yourself enough to set the boundaries that teach others how to treat you. That, perhaps, is the most important lesson from my journey. Learning when to be generous and when to close my wallet, not just financially but emotionally as well. Understanding that saying no to exploitation is saying yes to self-respect. And recognizing that the most valuable relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from someone who was taking advantage of your generosity? What signs did you miss early on that might have warned you something wasn't right? Please share your experiences in the comments below, as your story might help someone else recognize a similar situation in their own life. And if you found value in my journey, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can say is simply, "I closed my wallet."